Angus, if you're out there, buddy, we need to talk. Alright, I've already acquired 3 European-style swords from Siberia. That cluster of brand names out of Dalian, China. And I've been pretty much equally impressed with all 3 of them, which encouraged me to get, well, a 4th. What were the other 3? I've done reviews of them already. The Kingston Arms Renaissance side sword, the Ronin Italian arming sword, and surprisingly my cold steel Italian longsword, which in that initial impressions video I did, I was blown away by the quality compared to their swords that are made in India. Yeah, turns out this one came from, yeah, somewhere else, which is why it was so phenomenal. And they all have the same really good features and, well, a couple of the same not so good features that reflect, well, they're quite affordable, especially for, you know, what you're getting. So let's use this one as a good example of that. The Italian arming sword. Out of the box, the pommel was a bit bent. That was an easy fix. Guards on all of them had sharp spots, needed to be rounded out a bit just for my own comfort. Now, the other 2 don't have this issue, but this Ronin does. The seam is really humongous, and yeah, you feel it quite a lot in your grip, but more so on this one, the shape of the grip being so tapered. It's not a problem on the longsword, but on this one, yeah, it just feels like the thing is trying to pull itself out of my hand all the time. So that's not good. The extra grippiness of the texture, that's a help, but yeah, that's something I'm not crazy about with this sword. But the blades on all 3 are amazing. They are well polished, well shaped, crisp, even, nice lines. And more than anything else, the edges, yeah, there's really no secondary bevel to speak of, so you're looking at like a 20-degree edge. Single bevel edge. So these things cut almost as good as my katana do. Now, because they don't have clay tempered edges, you know, the edges need to be touched up more often. But, you know, what you get out of that is, you know, that bargain is more flexibility, resilience, springiness in the swords, which gives you a lighter tip. So if you want something that's more thrust centric, well, that makes sense. And I've talked about in other videos how I've used some of these swords in this range of European swords as good crossover weapons. While I'm learning HEMA, I can practice Chinese Gen with them, and actually some katana techniques. Let's talk about my new acquisition, shall we? Should have been a better sword, not only in terms of some of the specs for me and my intended use for it, but also the reviews were all pretty phenomenal. And what I got, let's just say if this was the first European sword I got from Siberia, I would not have bought any more. And that's a heavy thing to say. Kingston's Angus Trim design, Type 14 arming sword. All right, let's talk about the good, the bad, and the weird. Let's start with some of the weird. Scabbard, one of the things you can't see, well, probably can't see in the video, and I haven't really been able to see even in the photographs, is the leather is a lot redder than it looks on those pictures and videos. So it does have a reddish hue that you're probably not noticing. It's quite attractive. Now, I did need to put a little bit of treatment on the scabbard because it came looking pretty dry. It's a wood core, pretty solid. Leather throat, decent shape, kind of satin finish steel. It's tacked in a little bit roughly, but whatever. This is the first weird part, okay? The way that the scabbard is cut to fit the guard, it's okay. We're talking a sword that cost about $327, depending on where you got it. I got this at SBG. You can get it at Cult of Athena, a couple of other places. But yeah, between $325 and $350, you get what you pay for. Usually a lot more when we're talking about Siberia and SBG and Cult of Athena. Get a lot more than you're paying for. But check out this magic trick. Well, first of all, it's a really tight fit, just right at the throat. Okay, so it does right now take a lot of force to get it out, but once it's out, it comes pretty free. However, if I rotate the scabbard 180 degrees and go to reinsert the sword, it doesn't line up at all, which doesn't make any sense. Yes, the leather on the throat is cut differently, but the shape of the guard is the same on both sides. Why is it different? Okay. If I ever figure out the puzzle, I'll update in the comments. But for now, this is just like Twilight Zone. Weird. But that's not where it stops. Let's talk about the good and the frustrating. Good. Well, everything's tight. Peen construction. Now, the peen job is a little bit rough. It's not the greatest. Makes it look, though, handmade, so that's okay. Not a lot of detail in the disc pommel, but the grip is fantastic. The shape of the grip with that nice little palm swell feels really good. Now, I've seen different images that show lacing, leather lacing, and this is just one piece of leather with a fairly nice fine glued seam on one side, and then it's given that sort of cord impression texture. So that's really nice, and the size of the grip and the thickness and everything, that's good. Now, like the other Iberia brand swords, the guard, interesting though, the top edges are well beveled and rounded. The bottom edges, where my hand is, were sharp. So yeah, they needed rounding, but weirder. Again, a fit and finish issue. If you can see it, on one side, that kind of sharp crest in the middle of the crossguard, on one side it's even with the leather grip, but on the other side it's not. It shuts out about, I would say, a 1/16 of an inch, and it left a really sharp corner there digging into my hand. So about 15 minutes or so with a fine file, rounded that off and rounded everything else off. Now that's nice. So that's stuff I expect to do, especially with a sword in this price range. That's not the issue. What are the issues? First of all, let's look at the specs. The specs sounded really, really promising. 9260 spring steel. Yes, the shape of the blade and everything, that's up to quality. The weight, 2 pounds, 2 ounces, blade length 28 inches. Okay, so shorter than expected for this type of sword, but 28 inches puts this exactly in my range of familiarity for katana and gen. So if I'm using this again as a sword that I can employ as, to learn HEMA, to develop those skills in the past year or so, and also to continue practice of gen and find those similar techniques, tactics, this sounded like the perfect thing. 2 pounds, 2 ounces, 28-inch blade, and everybody says it handles really great. Point of balance, 5 inches on mine. I'll show you handling here in a minute, but yeah, it makes it really, really blade forward. So as a choppy, cutty sword, that makes sense, but for a cut and thrust sword, it doesn't feel right at all. And I'll demonstrate that in a second. But yeah, point of balance, that threw me. Yeah. But that wasn't the worst thing. The worst thing, and I don't know if I can really put this on Kingston, Iberia or not. The edge. There was a secondary bevel, if you could call it that. Maybe somebody at the factory or the store or wherever tried to put a different edge on it and did a butcher job, because there was a secondary bevel ground onto this thing that was really steep. And it was rough, ragged rough, like they'd use like an 80 grit sanding belt, so it left a really jagged mess. And it was probably about 50 degrees or more. I mean, it was pretty much near blunt. It wouldn't cut, well, anything. So I had to take it out and spend a lot of time on the sander today, because I couldn't let it stand. I had to go out and refile the whole thing. Now, okay, so result. my pack-in slip, because I'm not going to send it back. So now, yeah, now it cuts pretty darn well on both edges, but I need to qualify that statement. Distal taper. The tip is thicker than anticipated, which makes it strong for thrusting, but the bevel on the edges up here are more like 40-50 degrees, so I can't get a good edge on the first few inches at all. If I did this further down, I'd be bleeding, and I was for a second. Down here, well, about the mono uche, and they say the sweet spot for percussion on this thing sitting about 18 inches. Yeah, from here to here, on both edges, I have it really nice and sharp, and now it cuts, well, pretty well. But, yeah, that edge out of the box, and the fact that I still can't make a good sharp tip on the thing, yeah, that's, I'm not ready to forget that yet. Let's take a look at how it moves. Okay, we move the camera, we move the furniture. If these little action pieces are useful for you, let me know and I'll keep them coming. Otherwise, when it comes to this sword, as I said, I specifically got it as, well, a bridge between my practice of Hema and Chinese swordsmanship. And it's not quite doing it for me in the balance. If you guys have seen my series on Pragmatic Gen, you've probably already seen a lot of this. Now, yes, as you see in the reverse ready position, it works just fine. That's not going to be the problem. Where's the problem? Well, in any of the longer actions. So those short, more extended intercepts, throws, push cuts, wraps, the small counters like the extensions and the smaller smears and things like that, and just the thrusts in general. I am working a lot harder with this than I would be with a lot of my other, not just thrust-centric, but cut and thrust swords, including my back swords, that are significantly heavier than this, like more than a pound heavier than this. Now, when it comes to any of the more blade-centric, the bigger shoulder and arm movements, those figure-8 based techniques, those are fine. So when it comes to the broader cuts and parries and hinders, drag cuts, close slashes, things like that, the stabbing actions, that's not a problem. And again, I understand that this is an arming sword, not a finer, Renaissance period sword, and tends to be further back to protect the hands because they probably got something out here as protection. Speaking of, what about the other hand? Well, there's no room for a second hand on here, but again, going back to classical, traditional, at least modern traditional Gen, sword fingers. I can make contact with wrist and pommel for support, and yeah, that does change things, but of course the other thing it does is reduces reach and potentially puts that other hand out here in danger. Or not, depending on how you use it. So, not quite what I was expecting, not doing it for me in the balance department. Gonna have to find a niche for this. And like I said, if this was the first Cassiberia Euro sword that I acquired, I might not have bought any more, which would have been sad, because I love the other three. If you happen to have this sword, let me know what you think of yours. If you also have an arming sword or a side sword that you like, well, let me know about that one too, because I might not be done shopping yet. But until future reviews and maybe even updates on this one, I hope you found this useful, interesting, informative. Let's get that conversation going in the comments. I love talking to you guys. And as always, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you back again.